December the 18th, 1944. A freezing morning near the Belgian town of Saint-Vith. Hauptmann Friedrich von Berg watched through his binoculars as a peculiar American vehicle appeared on the snow-covered road ahead. It looked like someone had mounted a turret on a racing car, thin wheels, light frame, moving with an almost delicate grace that seemed absurd on a battlefield. "What is that?" asked Lieutenant Klaus Werner, squinting at the strange silhouette. "Some kind of reconnaissance vehicle," von Berg replied, lowering his binoculars with a dismissive grunt. "Tin can on wheels. Our Panzerfusses will crush it like a toy." The vehicle in question was the M8 Greyhound, officially designated the light armoured car M8, and to German officers encountering it for the first time, it looked laughably inadequate. Weighing just 7.9 tons compared to the Panzer IV's 25 tons, with armour barely thick enough to stop rifle bullets, the Greyhound appeared to be exactly what von Berg called it, a toy pretending to be a fighting vehicle. What German commanders didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined as they watched these light vehicles dance across the battlefield, was that this supposedly inadequate reconnaissance car would become one of the most successful armoured vehicles of the war. Within hours of von Berg's dismissive assessment, his entire understanding of armoured warfare would be shattered by what American ingenuity had created. The M8 Greyhound emerged from an urgent 1941 requirement for a fast, reliable reconnaissance vehicle. As the United States mobilized for war, military planners studied reports from Europe and North Africa, analyzing what worked and what failed in modern mechanized warfare. Traditional wheeled armored cars had proven inadequate. The British designs were too heavy and slow. French models were mechanically unreliable. German 8-wheeled armoured cars were effective but complex and expensive to produce. What the US Army wanted was something different, a vehicle that prioritised speed and mobility over protection, that could scout enemy positions, relay intelligence, and escape before being engaged. They wanted something that could go anywhere, fight when necessary, and survive through speed rather than armour. The Ford Motor Company received the contract in 1942. Their engineers, led by chief designer Robert Gregory, created something unprecedented. The M8 featured 6 wheels, all powered, giving it exceptional traction and mobility. The engine, a Hercules JXD inline 6-cylinder producing 110 horsepower, was placed in the rear, optimizing weight distribution and allowing the front to house the driver and bow gunner. The armour was deliberately thin, just 0.63 inches at its thickest point, barely enough to stop machine gun fire. This wasn't a flaw but a calculated design choice. Every pound of armour meant slower speed, shorter range, and poorer mobility. The Greyhound sacrificed protection for performance, betting that what it couldn't withstand it could outrun. The armament consisted of a 37mm M6 gun in an open-topped turret, the same weapon used on early Sherman tanks, plus a coaxial 30 caliber Browning machine gun and a 50 caliber heavy machine gun on a ring mount. Additional weapons included a 30 caliber machine gun in the hull. For a vehicle its size, the Greyhound packed surprising firepower. First Lieutenant James Larson, assigned to the 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, encountered his first M8 at Fort Benning in June 1943. His initial reaction was less than enthusiastic. "I thought they were kidding," he recalled in a 1987 interview. "This thing was our combat vehicle. It looked like something you'd see at a county fair. The armour was so thin you could practically see through it. The turret was open to the sky. It had wheels instead of tracks. Everything about it screamed vulnerable." Larson's instructor, a veteran of North Africa who had transferred back to train new units, set him straight quickly. "Stop thinking about armour," the sergeant said. "This isn't a tank, it's a racehorse with a gun. Your job isn't to slug it out with enemy armour. Your job is to find them, report them, and be gone before they can react. This vehicle can do 55 miles per hour on roads, 30 miles per hour cross-country. Can you think of any German vehicle that can catch you at that speed?" Larson couldn't, and that was precisely the point. The M8 represented a fundamental shift in reconnaissance doctrine. Previous armoured cars had tried to be small tanks, vehicles that could fight their way through opposition. The Greyhound abandoned that concept entirely. It was designed to avoid combat when possible, engage only when advantageous, and survive through superior mobility. The training program emphasized this philosophy ruthlessly. Crews learned to navigate by terrain rather than roads, to use speed as armour, to fire and displace in seconds. They practiced escaping ambushes, reversing at high speed, shooting while moving. The doctrine was simple: see first, shoot first, leave first. By September 1943, M8 units began arriving in Europe. The 2nd Cavalry Group landed in England and immediately began training for the invasion. British observers watching the Greyhounds during exercises were sceptical. Major Timothy Williamson of the 11th Hussars, veterans of the North African campaign, watched an M8 demonstration with barely concealed disdain. "Gentlemen," he told his American counterparts, "with all due respect, those vehicles won't last a week in combat. Jerry will tear them apart. The armour is inadequate, the gun is obsolete, and wheels simply don't work on European terrain. You need tracks, proper armour, and bigger guns." Captain Robert MacDonald, commanding officer of a troop, 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, smiled politely. "Major, would you care to race your Daimler scout car against our Greyhound across that muddy field?" Williamson accepted, confident in British engineering superiority. The race lasted less than 2 minutes. The M8, with its 6-wheel drive and superior power-to-weight ratio, crossed the churned field, while the 4-wheel drive Daimler bogged down repeatedly. When the American vehicle disappeared over the hill while the British car was still struggling through mud, Williamson's scepticism transformed into grudging respect. "Perhaps," he admitted, "we've underestimated American engineering. The Germans would make the same mistake, but they would learn the lesson under far more costly circumstances." D-Day, June 6, 1944. While infantry fought their way off the beaches, reconnaissance units prepared to exploit any breakthrough. The 2nd Cavalry Group, equipped with M8 Greyhounds and M20 armoured utility cars, landed on Utah Beach on June 8th, with orders to push inland and locate German positions. Lieutenant James Larson, now commanding a platoon of 4 M8s, received his first combat mission on June 10th. His orders were straightforward: advance toward the town of Carentan, locate enemy positions, report and return. Do not engage superior forces, preserve the vehicles at all costs. The reality of combat quickly diverged from training. Approaching a small village whose name Larson never learned, his led Greyhound rounded a corner and came face to face with a German patrol, 2 squads of infantry, and a Hanomag half-track mounting a 20mm cannon. What happened next lasted perhaps 15 seconds, but would define how American reconnaissance units operated for the rest of the war. The M8's 50 caliber gunner opened fire immediately, raking the German infantry. The turret gunner put 2 37mm rounds into the half-track, disabling it before its cannon could traverse. Then, before the stunned Germans could respond effectively, all 4 Greyhounds were reversing at maximum speed, their drivers executing high-speed backwards manoeuvres that would have been impossible in tracked vehicles. "We were gone before they knew what hit them," Larson recalled. "The whole engagement took maybe 15 seconds. We killed or wounded at least a dozen Germans, destroyed their vehicle, and escaped without a scratch. That's when I understood what we had. This wasn't a toy. This was a precision instrument for controlled violence." The intelligence Larson's patrol provided, German infantry dug in around the village, no armour support, vulnerable to flanking attack, allowed American forces to bypass the position and advance rapidly. The same pattern repeated across Normandy as reconnaissance units probed German defences, struck where weak, reported where strong, and disappeared before effective response. But it was the bocage country of Normandy that truly tested the M8's capabilities. The hedgerow terrain, small fields bordered by ancient earthen banks topped with thick vegetation, was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. Visibility was limited to yards, ambushes were easy, and armour was channelized on narrow roads. German defenders, expecting American armour to be road-bound and predictable, were shocked when Greyhounds appeared from unexpected directions. The 6-wheel drive allowed M8s to climb the hedgerow banks, something tracked vehicles struggled with. Their relatively light weight meant they didn't bog down in the soft Norman soil. Their speed allowed them to cross danger areas before German gunners could react. Staff Sergeant Michael Patterson, commanding an M8 in the 4th Cavalry Group, encountered German defensive positions near St. Lo in July 1944. His mission was to locate enemy artillery that had been shelling American positions. "We found them by accident," Patterson later wrote in his memoir. "Came around a hedgerow and there they were, 451st Cindy guns in a field, maybe 200 yards away. The crews were so shocked to see an American vehicle that close, they just froze. We didn't. Our gunner put a 37 Larcent round into the ammunition stored next to the nearest gun. The explosion destroyed 2 of the guns and killed most of the crew. We fired up the 3rd gun and the ammunition truck with the 50 caliber, then got the hell out of there. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. We were a mile away before German infantry even reached the position. This hit-and-run capability drove German commanders to distraction. Oberst Heinrich Müller, commanding the 352nd Infantry Division in Normandy, wrote in his July 1944 operations report, "The American reconnaissance vehicles are proving unexpectedly effective. They appear without warning, deliver accurate fire, and escape before our troops can respond. Traditional anti-tank defences are ineffective as these vehicles rarely present themselves as targets long enough for engagement. They are disrupting our rear areas, destroying supply vehicles, and killing isolated personnel with impunity. Conventional anti-reconnaissance tactics, roadblocks, ambushes, strong points fail against vehicles capable of cross-country speeds exceeding 30 km per hour. The German military had no equivalent vehicle. Their armoured cars, the Stichevs 234 series, were effective but rare, expensive, and mechanically complex. Most German reconnaissance was still conducted by motorcycles and half-tracks, vulnerable and slow compared to the Greyhound. The breakthrough from Normandy in August 1944 showcased the M8's strategic value. As American armour burst through German lines at Avranches, reconnaissance units raced ahead, sometimes 50 miles in front of main forces, scouting routes, locating German positions and causing havoc in rear areas. The 2nd and 3rd Cavalry groups, equipped primarily with Greyhounds, advanced across France at speeds that shocked both German defenders and American commanders. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Fickett, commanding the 2nd Cavalry Group, later described the advance. "We moved faster than anyone thought possible. My Greyhounds could maintain 40 miles per hour on decent roads, and they could go places tanks couldn't reach. We'd bypass German strongpoints, let the infantry deal with them, and keep pushing. In one 48-hour period, we advanced 120 miles, captured 3 towns, destroyed countless supply vehicles, and only lost 2 vehicles, both to mines." The psychological impact on German forces was profound. Retreating units, already demoralised by the Normandy breakout, found American armoured cars appearing from all directions. Supply columns were shot up, headquarters were evacuated in panic, communication lines were cut. The speed of the American advance created a fog of confusion that German commanders couldn't penetrate. Generalleutnant Hans von Funk, attempting to organise the defence of Chartres in August 1944, discovered American reconnaissance vehicles in his rear areas before his forward positions even reported enemy contact. "The Americans have perfected the art of reconnaissance in force," he wrote in a report to Army Group B headquarters. "Their light armoured vehicles operate with an independence and aggression that our doctrine never anticipated. They don't just observe, they attack. They don't just report, they destroy. And they move so rapidly that by the time we respond to one sighting, they've appeared somewhere else entirely. It's like fighting ghosts with machine guns." The liberation of Paris in late August 1944 saw Greyhounds of the 2nd French Armoured Division, equipped with American vehicles, racing through the streets. The M8's speed and manoeuvrability were perfect for urban combat, darting through narrow streets, appearing at intersections to destroy German positions, then vanishing before anti-tank weapons could be brought to bear. But it was during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 that the M8 Greyhound earned its legendary status, and where Hauptmann Friedrich von Berg would learn the hard lesson that appearance and effectiveness were very different things. December 16th, 1944. Germany launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, their massive offensive through the Ardennes. Over 200,000 German troops and hundreds of tanks crashed into thinly held American lines, creating chaos and threatening to split Allied forces. In this confused environment, reconnaissance became critical. American commanders needed to know where Germans were advancing, how strong they were, and where gaps existed in the enemy offensive. This mission fell largely to cavalry reconnaissance squadrons equipped with M8 Greyhounds. The 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, now part of the 7th Armoured Division, found itself directly in the path of the German advance. Lieutenant James Larson, by now a veteran of dozens of missions, led his platoon towards St. Vith, ordered to determine enemy strength and locations. What they found was terrifying. Entire German armoured divisions were pouring through gaps in American lines. Tiger tanks, Panther tanks, mechanised infantry and artillery were advancing in overwhelming strength. Larsen's small reconnaissance platoon was hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. Under normal circumstances, encountering such force would mean immediate withdrawal or destruction. But the M8's speed changed the equation. We played cat and mouse with an entire Panzer division, Larsen later recounted. They had hundreds of vehicles. We had 4 Greyhounds. But we could go places they couldn't, move faster than they could react, and shoot and scoot before they could return fire. We'd pop up on their flank, identify their units, maybe shoot up a supply truck, then vanish into the woods. They'd send tanks after us, but by the time they got there, we were 2 miles away. The intelligence gathered by reconnaissance units during the first critical days of the Battle of the Bulge was invaluable. American commanders knew where German spearheads were advancing, which roads they were using, where their flanks were vulnerable. This information allowed the rapid deployment of reserves to critical points. On December 18th, the encounter that opened this story occurred. Hauptmann von Berg's tank company, advancing towards Saint-Vith as part of the 18th Volksgrenadier Division's attack, encountered Larsen's reconnaissance platoon. Von Berg commanded 4 Panzer IV tanks and had orders to secure the road junction ahead. His force was overwhelming compared to 4 lightly armoured cars. The engagement began when von Berg's lead tank rounded a bend and spotted an M8 Greyhound 600 yards ahead. The Panzer IV's 70mm gun could have destroyed the American vehicle with a single hit. But before the German gunner could fire, the Greyhound disappeared, reversing behind a building at a speed the tank couldn't match. "Pursue," von Berg ordered, confident his heavier armour and superior firepower would prevail. What followed was a masterclass in mobility warfare. The German tanks, with their top speed of 25 miles per hour and poor reverse speed, couldn't keep pace with Greyhounds capable of 55 miles per hour forward and 25 miles per hour in reverse. Every time von Berg's tanks approached, the American vehicles would appear at an unexpected angle, fire several rounds, then vanish. The 37mm gun couldn't penetrate a Panzer IV's frontal armour, but it didn't have to. The M8s targeted tracks, vision ports, engine decks, anything vulnerable. One German tank threw a track trying to traverse rough ground in pursuit. Another was struck in the engine compartment and caught fire. The American vehicles, meanwhile, remained untouched, visible only for seconds at a time, impossible to target effectively. After 45 minutes of this harassment, von Berg called off the pursuit. He'd advanced less than 2 miles, lost 2 tanks to mobility kills, and accomplished nothing except confirming American positions. Worse, his movements had been observed and reported. Within hours, American artillery began falling on German assembly areas, guided by reconnaissance reports. "I learned respect that day," von Berg admitted in a 1978 interview. "We thought the American reconnaissance vehicles were toys because they looked fragile. We didn't understand that in modern warfare the vehicle that sees first and moves fastest often beats the vehicle with the thickest armour. Those little armoured cars made fools of us." Throughout the Battle of the Bulge, M8 units performed critical missions. They screened withdrawals, allowing American infantry to escape encirclement. They identified gaps in German lines that allowed counterattacks. They harassed supply columns, disrupting German logistics. And they survived in an environment where survival seemed impossible, purely through speed and superior tactics. Staff Sergeant Thomas Henderson, commanding an M8 in the 14th Cavalry Group, found himself cut off behind German lines near Bastogne on December 20th. His 3-vehicle section had been conducting reconnaissance when German forces swept through, isolating them. For 6 days, Henderson's Greyhounds operated in German-controlled territory, hiding during the day, moving at night, living off captured German supplies. "We were like pirates," Henderson recalled. "We'd hit a supply convoy at night, grab whatever we needed, food, fuel, ammunition, then disappear before they could respond. We destroyed maybe 20 German trucks, killed dozens of soldiers, and reported German positions by radio. When we finally broke through to American lines, our vehicles looked like they'd been through hell, but every man came back alive." The flexibility of the M8 platform allowed for numerous variants that proved equally valuable. The M20 armoured utility car, built on the same chassis but without the turret, served as a command vehicle and ammunition carrier. Its open top and additional storage made it perfect for carrying supplies and evacuating wounded. The addition of a .50 caliber machine gun on a ring mount gave it significant firepower. Technical Sergeant Robert Williams, commanding an M20 in the 4th Cavalry Group, used his vehicle to evacuate 23 wounded soldiers during the Battle of the Bulge, making multiple trips through German-infested territory. The M20 was fast enough to outrun trouble and tough enough to take some hits, Williams said. We took fire on every trip, but the speed kept us alive. German soldiers would shoot at us, and by the time they reloaded, we were already out of range. The M8's mechanical reliability proved as important as its speed. While German armoured vehicles suffered from overcomplexity and chronic maintenance issues, the Greyhound's simple design meant it kept running. The Hercules engine, derived from commercial truck designs, was robust and easy to maintain. The drivetrain was straightforward. Most repairs could be accomplished by the crew with basic tools. Private First Class Anthony Romano, a mechanic with the 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, maintained a platoon of M8s throughout the European campaign. Those Greyhounds were almost indestructible, he recalled. The engine was simple, everything was accessible and parts were available. Compare that to German vehicles that needed specialised tools and rare parts. I kept our platoon at 100% operational readiness for months. Try doing that with a German armoured car. As Allied forces pushed into Germany in early 1945, M8 units continued to prove their worth. The rapid advance across the Rhine and into the German interior required constant reconnaissance. Greyhounds raced ahead of main forces, sometimes 50 to 100 miles in advance, reporting on German defences, locating bridges and identifying bypass routes. Lieutenant Harold Becker, commanding a reconnaissance platoon in the 3rd Cavalry Group, reached the Elbe River on April 25, 1945, days ahead of main American forces. His 4 M8s had advanced over 200 miles in less than a week, navigating through collapsing German resistance. Germany was falling apart, Becker recalled. Refugee columns, retreating soldiers, bombed-out cities. We moved through it like water through a sieve, around obstacles, through gaps, never stopping long enough to get caught. The Greyhound was perfect for this environment, fast enough to avoid trouble, armed enough to fight when necessary, and reliable enough to keep running no matter what. The M8's effectiveness in urban combat became apparent during the fighting for German cities. Traditional tanks, while powerful, were vulnerable in urban environments, exposed to close-range anti-tank weapons, unable to manoeuvre in narrow streets. The Greyhound's speed and agility made it ideal for city fighting. During the Battle for Aachen in October 1944, M8s of the 117th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron worked with infantry to clear German positions. The armoured cars would race down streets at high speed, too fast for German soldiers to target effectively, then stop suddenly to allow their gunners to engage German strongpoints with 37 artillery's fire and machine guns. Sergeant James O'Brien, a gunner in an M8 during the Aachen fighting, described the tactic. We called it the running gun battle. The driver would go flat out down the street while I traversed the turret looking for targets. When I spotted a German position, pillbox, machine gun nest, whatever, I'd yell, "Stop!" The driver would slam the brakes, I'd fire 2 or 3 rounds, then we'd be moving again before the Germans could respond. It was crazy, but it worked. We cleared entire blocks that way. The psychological impact of M8s on German soldiers increased as the war progressed. By 1945, German troops, already demoralized by constant defeat, came to fear the sudden appearance of American reconnaissance vehicles. The Greyhound's distinctive silhouette and engine sound became associated with imminent attack and destruction. Gefreiter Klaus Schmidt, a German infantry soldier captured near Cologne in March 1945, described the fear. You would hear them before you saw them, that high-pitched engine sound. Then they would appear, moving so fast you couldn't track them. They would shoot up everything, trucks, positions, anything, then vanish. We called them lightning vehicles because they struck like lightning and were gone just as fast. If you saw one, you knew American forces were close, and you knew your position was being reported. Death was coming. The intelligence-gathering capability of M8 units contributed significantly to Allied success. Every reconnaissance mission generated detailed reports, enemy positions, unit identifications, defensive preparations, supply movements. This information fed into Allied intelligence databases, creating comprehensive pictures of German dispositions. Major Richard Thompson, an intelligence officer with 1st Army, relied heavily on cavalry reconnaissance reports. The information from M8 units was gold, he stated in a post-war report. They could get close enough to read unit markings on German vehicles, count tanks in assembly areas, identify officer vehicles. Tank and infantry units couldn't do this. Aircraft couldn't get this level of detail. The reconnaissance squadrons were our eyes on the battlefield, and the M8 gave them the mobility and protection to do the job. The casualty rates for M8 crews, while higher than some combat arms, were lower than might be expected given their mission profile. The speed and mobility that defined the Greyhound kept crews alive. When ambushed, M8s could accelerate away faster than most weapons could track. When engaged by armour, they could break contact before the enemy could achieve a killing hit. Lieutenant James Larson survived the entire European campaign commanding Greyhounds, participating in over 200 combat missions. "I lost vehicles," he recalled, "but I rarely lost men. The M8 protected its crew not with thick armour, but with speed. If we were fast enough, smart enough, and lucky enough, we could get out of anything. I saw Greyhounds absorb hits that should have killed them and keep running. I saw crews escape situations that should have been fatal. The vehicle was forgiving of mistakes and rewarding of skill." The end of the war in Europe in May 1945 saw M8 units conducting their final reconnaissance missions, patrolling for German holdouts, securing roads, and maintaining order. The Greyhound had proven itself as one of the war's most successful armoured vehicles, not through heavy armour or powerful guns, but through speed, reliability, and intelligent design. The production statistics told part of the story. Between 1943 and 1945, American factories produced 8,523 M8 Greyhounds and 3,691 M20 utility cars. This mass production, enabled by the vehicle's relatively simple design and use of commercial components, ensured that reconnaissance units always had vehicles available. Compare this to German armoured car production. Germany built approximately 200 Streitkräfte, 234 series armoured cars during the entire war, despite the type's excellence. The complex design, specialised, components, and resource constraints limited production. By 1945, most German reconnaissance was conducted by whatever vehicles could be scrounged, a stark contrast to American units that maintained full equipment tables throughout the war. The operational availability rates illustrated the difference in design philosophy. American M8 units routinely maintained 85 to 95% operational readiness, meaning nearly all vehicles were mission-capable at any time. German units, plagued by mechanical breakdowns and parts shortages, often operated at 50% readiness or less. This reliability gap compounded the numerical advantage. Not only did Americans have more reconnaissance vehicles, but those vehicles were actually available for use. The cost comparison was equally stark. An M8 Greyhound cost approximately $30,000 to produce in 1944 dollars. A German Decisive 234 cost over $100,000 in equivalent purchasing power. The American vehicle was cheaper, simpler, and more reliable than its German counterpart, perfectly embodying the industrial warfare philosophy of good enough in quantity beats excellent in scarcity. Post-war analysis by military historians consistently rank the M8 Greyhound as one of the most successful armoured vehicles of World War II. Its combination of speed, firepower, reliability, and cost-effectiveness made it ideal for its intended role. Unlike many wartime designs that were compromised or ineffective, the Greyhound did exactly what it was supposed to do, and did it superbly. Colonel Bruce Palmer Jr., who commanded cavalry reconnaissance units in Europe, wrote in his memoir, "The M8 was the perfect reconnaissance vehicle for the European theatre. It could go anywhere, fight when necessary, and survive through mobility." Critics pointed to its thin armour and light gun as weaknesses. They missed the point entirely. The M8 wasn't designed to fight tanks. It was designed to find them, report them, and get away. In that mission, it was unmatched. The vehicle's success extended beyond Europe. In the Pacific Theatre, M8 served with cavalry units in the Philippines, providing reconnaissance and fire support. The vehicle's performance on Pacific roads, often little more than muddy tracks, demonstrated the value of the six-wheel drive system. In Italy, Greyhounds operated in mountainous terrain that seemed impossible for wheeled vehicles, proving that good design could overcome supposed limitations. After the war, the M8 served in numerous armies around the world. The French used Greyhounds in Indochina and Algeria. The nationalist Chinese employed them against communist forces. Numerous Latin American countries operated M8s through the 1970s. Some vehicles remained in service into the 1980s, a testament to the soundness of the basic design. The lessons learned from M8 operations influenced post-war armoured vehicle development. The emphasis on speed and mobility over protection, the value of reliable mechanical systems, and the effectiveness of hit-and-run tactics all informed future designs. Modern reconnaissance vehicles, from the M17 Guardian to the JLTV, embody principles first proven by the Greyhound. In 1984, at a reunion of the 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, veterans gathered to remember their wartime service. Among the displays was a restored M8 Greyhound, its 6 wheels and distinctive turret evoking memories of youth and danger and triumph. Lieutenant James Larson, by then 62 years old and long retired, sat in the commander's position, his hands automatically finding the controls he'd last touched 40 years earlier. "This vehicle saved my life dozens of times," he said to assembled veterans and their families. "It looked like a toy to the Germans, and that was their mistake. They thought armour and guns were everything. We proved that speed and brains mattered more. This little armoured car did more damage to German forces than vehicles 10 times its size. It deserves to be remembered as one of the great fighting vehicles of the war." Hauptmann Friedrich von Berg, the German officer who had dismissed the M8 as a toy in December 1944, survived the war and eventually immigrated to Canada. In a 1986 letter to an American military historian researching reconnaissance operations, von Berg wrote about his experiences. "I must tell you that my initial assessment of the American M8 armoured car was entirely wrong. We German officers were trained to think in terms of armour thickness and gun calibre. The heaviest armour and biggest gun won the battle, we believed. The M8 taught us that mobility could defeat armour, that a vehicle you cannot hit cannot be killed regardless of its armour thickness. I lost good men and valuable tanks trying to catch those American reconnaissance vehicles. They were never where we expected, always gone before we could respond and constantly reporting our positions to their artillery and aircraft. We called them the phantom vehicles because they appeared and disappeared like ghosts. They were far more effective than their specification suggested, and they contributed significantly to Germany's defeat. I learned to respect them, but I learned too late. The M8 Greyhound story embodies a fundamental truth about military technology. Specifications don't tell the whole story. On paper, the Greyhound was inferior to many vehicles it faced: thinner armour, smaller gun, wheeled instead of tracked. But in practice it was exactly what was needed: fast enough to avoid danger, tough enough to survive when caught, and capable enough to complete its mission. The German officers who thought it was a toy were applying old standards to a new reality. They judged the M8 by World War I criteria, armour and firepower, without understanding that World War II reconnaissance required different qualities: speed, reliability, and situational awareness. By the time they understood their mistake, it was too late. The Greyhounds were everywhere, seeing everything, reporting constantly, and dying rarely. In the final accounting, the M8 Greyhound proved that in warfare, as in life, success comes not from being the biggest or strongest, but from being fast enough, smart enough, and tough enough to do the job. The ungainly-looking armoured car with its thin skin and light gun outperformed vehicles with twice the armour and 3 times the firepower because it was designed intelligently, built reliably, and employed effectively. The Germans learned this lesson the hard way, taught by a vehicle they initially dismissed as a toy. By the time they realised their error, that toy had helped defeat the most powerful military machine in Europe. The M8 Greyhound, despised at first sight, became one of the war's quiet success stories, proving that American industrial pragmatism could triumph over European military tradition. The thunder of 8-wheeled German armoured cars and the roar of Tiger tanks became irrelevant when faced with a simple 6-wheeled armoured car that saw first, shot first, and most importantly, left first. German officers stopped laughing about the American toy vehicle sometime in late 1944. By then, the M8 Greyhound had already won the reconnaissance war, and with it, helped win the larger conflict. The vehicle they dismissed had helped destroy them, not through heavy armour or powerful guns, but through speed, intelligence, and the quintessentially American belief that doing the job well mattered more than looking impressive while doing it. The Korean War erupted on June 25, 1950. catching the United States largely unprepared. The rapid demobilization after World War II had left American forces equipped with aging equipment and reduced personnel. Among the vehicles pulled from storage and rushed to Korea were hundreds of M8 Greyhounds, some of which had been sitting in depots since 1945. The terrain of Korea seemed designed to punish wheeled vehicles. Mountainous, cut by rivers and streams, with roads that were little more than dirt tracks in many areas, the peninsula appeared ideal for tracked vehicles and disastrous for wheels. Military planners worried that the M8, so successful in Europe's relatively developed road network, would prove useless in Korea's primitive conditions. They were wrong again. The 7th Cavalry Regiment, arriving in Korea in September 1950, brought their M8 Greyhounds into combat within days. Lieutenant Robert Chang, a Chinese-American officer commanding a reconnaissance platoon, discovered that the Greyhound's 6-wheel drive gave it mobility that surprised everyone, including the crews. "We were told to expect limited mobility," Chang recalled in a 1983 interview. The terrain was supposed to be too rough for wheeled vehicles, but the M8 went places that shocked us. Those 6-driven wheels gave incredible traction. We climbed hills that looked impossible. We forded streams. We crossed rice paddies. The vehicle was far more capable than anyone expected. The North Korean army, equipped primarily with Soviet weapons and vehicles, encountered M8s during the Incheon breakout. Their initial response mirrored German reactions 6 years earlier, contempt for what appeared to be a lightly armed and armoured vehicle. This contempt evaporated quickly. North Korean forces relied heavily on roadblocks and ambushes, tactics that worked well against slower vehicles. The M8's speed allowed American reconnaissance units to blast through ambushes before North Korean troops could react effectively. Staff Sergeant William Morrison, commanding an M8 in the 8th Cavalry Regiment, encountered a North Korean roadblock north of Seoul in September 1950. The roadblock consisted of a disabled truck across the road, supported by 2 machine gun positions and approximately 20 infantry. "We came around a curve and there it was," Morrison recalled. "A textbook ambush. They opened fire immediately. Our driver, Private Collins, didn't even slow down. He went off-road, around the roadblock, while I traversed the turret and hosed down their positions with the .50 caliber. We were through the kill zone in maybe 10 seconds. They never had a chance to adjust fire. That was the beauty of the Greyhound. Speed was armour." The Chinese intervention in November 1950 brought massive communist forces into the war and changed the nature of combat. The Chinese relied on infiltration tactics, moving large forces at night, avoiding roads, and striking from unexpected directions. Conventional reconnaissance methods struggled against an enemy that didn't use roads and moved primarily in darkness. The M8 units adapted by conducting aggressive patrols, moving constantly, checking every valley and ridgeline, and maintaining contact with Chinese forces even when main American units withdrew. During the fighting withdrawal from the Joseon Reservoir, M8 units of the 7th Infantry Division provided screening for the retreating columns, a desperate mission that should have resulted in the loss of all reconnaissance vehicles. Sergeant First Class James Rodriguez commanded an M8 providing rearguard security during the withdrawal. His mission was to report Chinese movements and delay their advance, buying time for the main column to escape. For 3 days, Rodriguez's crew engaged Chinese forces, withdrew, engaged again, in a fighting retreat through frozen mountain roads. The temperature was 30 below zero, Rodriguez said. The Greyhound kept running when everything else was freezing solid. The Hercules engine was so reliable, so simple, that it just kept turning over. We'd engage Chinese forces, fall back, engage again. The 37mm was perfect for that kind of fighting. We could put rounds into Chinese positions at 800 yards, causing casualties and disruption, then displace before their mortars could range us. Rodriguez's M8 took multiple hits from small arms fire and shrapnel from mortar rounds. The thin armour that critics derided saved the crew's lives repeatedly. Bullets penetrated the armour but lost enough energy that they didn't have lethal effect. Shrapnel that would have ricocheted catastrophically off thicker armour punched through cleanly, causing damage but not destroying the vehicle. We reached the coast with over 40 holes in that Greyhound, Rodriguez recalled, but the engine ran, the wheels turned, and every man in the crew survived. The vehicle brought us home again, just like it brought boys home from Germany. The static warfare that developed by 1951 saw M8 units conducting different missions. With front lines relatively stable, reconnaissance focused on patrol activities, monitoring no man's land and providing security for outposts. The Greyhound's speed made it ideal for rapid response to enemy incursions. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, commanding a reconnaissance platoon in 1952, described the routine. "We'd patrol the front constantly, checking outposts, looking for Chinese activity, responding to reports of infiltration. The M8 could get anywhere quickly. If an outpost reported movement, we could be there in minutes. The firepower was enough to handle anything short of armour. We were the mobile reserve, the quick reaction force, and the eyes of the division, all in one vehicle." The guerrilla warfare in South Korea's rear areas provided another mission for M8 units. North Korean infiltrators and sympathizers conducted sabotage, ambushes, and attacks on supply lines. Hunting these guerrillas required speed and mobility, exactly what the Greyhound provided. Captain David Wilson, leading a counter-guerrilla operation in 1951, used M8s to track and engage North Korean guerrillas in the mountains of southern Korea. The guerrillas would hit a convoy or attack a village, then disappear into the mountains, Wilson explained. We'd respond with Greyhounds racing to the area, setting up blocking positions and hunting them down. The M8 could go places guerrillas thought were safe from vehicles. We'd appear on mountain tracks they thought were inaccessible. The psychological impact was significant. They couldn't hide from us. The French experience with M8s in Indochina paralleled American operations in Korea. Fighting against Viet Minh guerrillas in difficult terrain, French reconnaissance units found the Greyhound surprisingly effective. French tactics differed from American doctrine. Rather than using M8s purely for reconnaissance, French commanders employed them as mobile fire support, using the 37mm gun as light artillery and the machine guns for suppressive fire. Capitaine Henri Dubois, commanding an armoured car squadron in Tonkin in 1952, praised the M8's reliability. "In Indochina, mechanical reliability was everything," he said. "The humidity, the heat, the dust all killed vehicles. The Greyhound kept running. The engine was simple enough that our mechanics could maintain it with basic tools. We operated hundreds of kilometres from proper facilities, and the vehicles never let us down." The Viet Minh, like previous enemies, initially underestimated the M8. Accustomed to facing French armour that was slow and road-bound, they developed tactics based on mobility and ambush. The Greyhound's speed negated many of these advantages. Ambushes that relied on slow-moving targets found M8s already past the kill zone before weapons could be brought to bear. French use of M8s in convoy escort proved particularly effective. Rather than placing armoured vehicles within the convoy where they moved at the convoy's slow speed, French doctrine called for M8s to race ahead, checking likely ambush sites, then falling back to check the convoy's rear. This aggressive patrolling prevented many ambushes and disrupted those that did occur. The Battle of Na San in November 1952 saw French M8s conducting reconnaissance that identified Viet Minh positions and allowed French artillery to break up attacks before they reached French lines. The mobility that allowed Greyhounds to cover large areas quickly proved decisive in gathering the intelligence needed to defeat the Viet Minh assault. But the French experience also revealed the M8's limitations in a new environment. The Viet Minh increasingly employed mines and improvised explosive devices, weapons against which the Greyhound's thin floor armour provided little protection. Several M8s were destroyed by mines, with casualties among the crews highlighting vulnerability to weapons that speed couldn't defeat. Despite these losses, French commanders continued to value the M8. General Raoul Salan, commanding French forces in Indochina, noted in a 1953 report that M8 units had the highest operational readiness rate of any French armoured vehicles, and that their intelligence gathering was invaluable. The vehicle's limitations with mines, he argued, were less significant than its advantages in mobility and reliability. Back in Korea, the armistice negotiations dragged on through 1952 and into 1953. During this period, both sides conducted aggressive patrolling and fought fierce battles for hill positions. M8 units continued their reconnaissance missions, operating in the narrow space between front lines, gathering intelligence on Chinese positions and intentions. The final major action involving M8s in Korea came during the Chinese Spring Offensive of 1953. Chinese forces, attempting to strengthen their negotiating position, launched attacks across the front. American reconnaissance units provided early warning of these attacks, allowing defensive preparations that blunted the offensive. Sergeant Michael O'Malley, commanding an M8 on the Central Front, detected Chinese assault preparations on the night of May 28, 1953. His report of massed Chinese infantry forming in assault positions allowed American artillery to strike before the attack began, disrupting the assault and saving countless American lives. "We could hear them in the darkness," O'Malley recalled. "Thousands of men moving into position. We couldn't see them, but we could hear them. I reported mass movement, requested artillery fire, and got out of there. The artillery hit them while they were still forming up. The attack never materialized on our sector. That was reconnaissance at its best, finding the enemy and calling in the big guns." The Korean War ended with the armistice on July 27, 1953. In 3 years of combat, M8 units had proven the vehicle's worth in terrain and conditions completely different from Europe. The Greyhound that skeptics thought would fail in Korean mountains had performed magnificently, adapting to new challenges and continuing to provide the speed and reliability that defined its reputation. The post-Korea period saw M8s continuing in service with numerous armies. Many countries, unable to afford more modern vehicles, operated Greyhounds through the 1960s and 1970s. The basic soundness of the design meant that properly maintained vehicles remained effective decades after production ended. The Portuguese used M8s extensively in their colonial wars in Angola and Mozambique from 1961 to 1974. Fighting against guerrillas in African bush country, Portuguese reconnaissance units found the Greyhound's combination of speed and firepower ideal for counterinsurgency operations. Portuguese doctrine emphasized mobile columns that could respond rapidly to guerrilla activity. M8s provided the speed and protection necessary for these operations, racing through hostile territory to reach attacked positions or intercept guerrilla units. Capitão Antonio Silva, commanding a reconnaissance company in Angola in 1968, described operations. "The guerrillas relied on attacking and disappearing before we could respond. The M8 changed that equation. We could respond in minutes instead of hours. The vehicles could maintain 60 kilometers per hour on our roads, reaching battle areas while guerrillas were still present. The firepower was sufficient to engage guerrilla positions effectively. Many successful operations hinged on the speed the Greyhound provided." Latin American countries operated M8s through the 1970s, with some remaining in service into the 1980s. Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and numerous other nations used Greyhounds for internal security and border patrol. The vehicle's reliability and low operating costs made them attractive for countries with limited defense budgets. The Mexican army operated M8s along the northern border into the 1970s, conducting patrols and anti-smuggling operations. The Greyhound's speed made it effective for pursuing smugglers, while the armament provided capability against armed criminals. Teniente Carlos Mendoza, commanding a border patrol unit in 1972, noted that his 25-year-old vehicles remained fully operational. "These vehicles were older than I was," Mendoza said, "but they ran perfectly. The mechanics were simple, parts were available, they did everything we needed. Why replace something that still works?" The gradual retirement of M8s from military service through the 1970s and 1980s marked the end of an era. Modern reconnaissance vehicles with improved armor, weapons, and electronics replaced the aging Greyhounds. But the lessons learned from M8 operations continued to influence design and doctrine. The emphasis on speed and mobility, proven so effective by the Greyhound, became fundamental to modern reconnaissance doctrine. Current vehicles like the LAV-25 and Striker embody the same philosophy. Find the enemy quickly, report accurately, engage when advantageous, and survive through superior mobility rather than heavy armor. Museums and private collections preserved numerous M8 Greyhounds, ensuring that future generations could see the vehicle that had served so effectively. The National Armor and Cavalry Museum at Fort Moore houses several M8s, including one that served in both World War II and Korea. Veterans organizations maintain operational Greyhounds, participating in commemorative events and parades. At a 1994 reunion of Korean War reconnaissance veterans, held at Fort Hood, Texas, an operational M8 Greyhound demonstrated its capabilities for assembled veterans and their families. The 50-year-old vehicle performed flawlessly, racing across the demonstration area, conducting fire missions and executing tactical maneuvers. Master Sergeant Robert Chang, the same lieutenant who had commanded an M8 in Korea, now 67 years old, rode in the commander's position one final time. After the demonstration, he addressed the assembled veterans and guests. This vehicle represents American ingenuity at its finest. When others built reconnaissance vehicles trying to be small tanks, America built a vehicle that embraced its role. Fast enough to escape danger, reliable enough to never let you down, and capable enough to fight when necessary. I trusted this vehicle with my life and career, and it never failed me. Every man here who served in Greyhounds came home because these vehicles did their jobs superbly. We owe this machine a debt we can never fully repay. The historical assessment of the M8 Greyhound has grown more appreciative over time. Contemporary critics during World War II often dismissed it as inadequate, comparing it unfavourably to heavier armoured cars. Modern military historians, with the benefit of hindsight and access to combat records from all sides, recognise the M8 as a masterpiece of focused design. Dr. Robert Cameron, historian at the Army Command and General Staff College, wrote in a 2008 study of reconnaissance vehicles, "The M8 Greyhound succeeded because it was designed to do one thing superbly rather than everything adequately. It was a reconnaissance vehicle, pure and simple. Every design choice maximised speed, reliability, and sustainability. The thin armour wasn't a flaw but a feature, allowing the weight savings necessary for superior mobility. The 37mm gun, derided by some as obsolete, provided exactly the firepower needed for the vehicle's mission. The result was a vehicle that performed its role better than any contemporary design. Combat records support this assessment. M8 units consistently achieved their reconnaissance objectives while maintaining lower casualty rates than other reconnaissance elements. The vehicle's mechanical reliability meant that missions rarely failed due to vehicle breakdown. The speed and mobility allowed crews to escape situations that would have been fatal in other vehicles. Statistical analysis of reconnaissance operations in Europe shows that M8-equipped units provided more timely and accurate intelligence than units using other vehicles. The Greyhound's ability to approach closer to enemy positions, observe longer, and report more detailed information gave commanders superior battlefield awareness. The economic analysis is equally compelling. The total program cost for M8 production, including development, tooling, and manufacturing of 8,523 vehicles, was approximately $260 million in 1940s dollars. This provided reconnaissance capability that served effectively for over 30 years in various armies. Compare this to modern reconnaissance vehicle programs that cost billions for far fewer vehicles, and the M8's cost-effectiveness becomes apparent. The industrial mobilization story behind M8 production exemplified American manufacturing capability. Ford's initial production of M8s began in March 1943. Within 6 months, the company was producing 400 vehicles monthly. At peak production in 1944, Ford completed one M8 every 90 minutes, around the clock. This production rate required coordination of thousands of suppliers providing components. The Hercules engine came from Canton, Ohio. The armor plate was rolled in Pennsylvania. The weapons came from various arsenals. The tires were manufactured in Akron. All these components converged at Ford's plant in perfect synchronization, allowing continuous production. The workforce that built M8s typified wartime America. Women comprised over 40% of the workers, many of them entering industrial work for the first time. African Americans, previously excluded from many manufacturing jobs, worked alongside whites in the war effort. Skilled craftsmen trained newcomers, passing on expertise that transformed civilians into precision manufacturers in weeks. Rose Martinez, who worked at Ford building M8s from 1943 to 1945, recalled her experience in a 1999 oral history interview. "I'd never seen the inside of a factory before the war. I was a waitress. Suddenly I'm riveting armor plate and installing electrical systems in armored cars. They trained us, taught us quality standards, and expected perfection. We knew soldiers' lives depended on our work. Every rivet had to be perfect. Every wire had to be placed correctly. The pressure was intense, but we took pride in building the best vehicles possible. When the war ended and I saw newsreels of M8s in action, I felt proud knowing I'd helped build them." The engineering challenges in M8 production were substantial. The vehicle required precision manufacturing to ensure all 6 wheels remained aligned and properly powered. The turret ring had to be machined to tolerances of a few thousandths of an inch to ensure smooth rotation. The weapon synchronization gear required exact timing to prevent rounds from striking the propeller or vehicle structure. Ford's engineers developed specialized tooling and processes to meet these challenges. Automated systems aligned wheels. Custom jigs held turret rings during machining. Test procedures verified every system before acceptance. The quality control was so rigorous that M8s arrived at combat units essentially ready for action, requiring minimal preparation before operational use. The supply chain supporting M8 operations rivaled production in complexity. Each vehicle required spare parts, ammunition, fuel, and maintenance supplies. The logistics system that kept thousands of Greyhounds operational across multiple theatres represented a triumph of planning and execution. Ammunition supply alone was staggering. Each M8 carried 80 rounds of 37 Leicester ammunition, 500 rounds of .30 caliber, and 400 rounds of .50 caliber. With thousands of vehicles operating, monthly ammunition consumption reached millions of rounds. Every round had to be manufactured, shipped overseas, distributed to units, and delivered to vehicles in combat zones. Fuel consumption was equally demanding. M8s averaged 8 miles per gallon, meaning each vehicle consumed approximately 30 gallons daily during active operations. Thousands of vehicles required hundreds of thousands of gallons monthly, all shipped from American refineries, transported across oceans in tankers, and distributed through combat zones. The spare parts system ensured that damaged vehicles returned to service quickly. Common failure items, tyres, electrical components, suspension parts were stockpiled at multiple levels. Repair procedures were standardized and documented. Mechanics received training on all systems. The result was an operational readiness rate that exceeded 85% throughout the war, extraordinary for combat vehicles operating under harsh conditions. The training system that produced M8 crews was equally impressive. The cavalry school at Fort Riley, Kansas developed comprehensive training programs covering vehicle operation, gunnery, tactics, and maintenance. Soldiers received 6 weeks of specialized training before joining operational units. The training emphasized practical skills. Students drove M8s across rough terrain, learning to exploit the vehicle's capabilities and manage its limitations. They fired all weapon systems, learning proper techniques for engaging various targets. They practiced tactical scenarios, developing the judgment necessary for effective reconnaissance. Critically, training included maintenance procedures. Every crew member learned basic mechanical skills, allowing them to perform field repairs and routine maintenance. This cross-training meant that vehicles remained operational even when specialized mechanics weren't available. Technical Sergeant James Kowalski, an instructor at Fort Riley from 1943 to 1945, described the training philosophy. "We didn't just teach soldiers to drive and shoot, we taught them to think. Reconnaissance requires judgment, knowing when to fight and when to run, when to report, and when to investigate further. We put students in scenarios where they had to make decisions under pressure. The best reconnaissance crews were the ones who could think fastest and make smart choices. The M8 gave them the tool to execute those decisions. The international influence of M8 design extended beyond countries that operated the vehicle. Many nations studying reconnaissance vehicle requirements examined the Greyhound's design philosophy, even if they didn't adopt the vehicle itself. The British developed the Saladin armoured car in the 1950s, incorporating many lessons from M8 operations. The French Panhard AML, designed in the 1960s, reflected similar emphasis on speed and firepower over protection. Even Soviet reconnaissance vehicle design showed M8 influence, with greater attention to mobility and sustainability. The specific engineering solutions pioneered in the M8 became industry standards. The six-wheel drive system with individually powered wheels became common in armoured cars. The rear engine, front control layout maximised internal volume and weight distribution. The emphasis on automotive components and simple systems improved reliability across multiple vehicle types. Modern military vehicle designers still reference the M8 when discussing reconnaissance requirements. The fundamental questions the Greyhound answered remain relevant. How much armour is necessary? What weapons are sufficient? How important is speed versus protection? The M8's answers, minimal armour, adequate weapons, maximum speed, continue to influence modern designs. The cultural impact of the M8 extended beyond military circles. The distinctive appearance of the Greyhound, low profile, 6 wheels, open turret, made it visually memorable. It appeared in countless wartime photographs and newsreels, becoming iconic of American reconnaissance forces. Veterans returning from service often spoke of their time in Greyhounds with affection unusual for military equipment. Unlike tanks, which inspired respect mixed with fear, or jeeps, which were utilitarian necessities, the M8 seemed to generate genuine fondness from those who served in it. The reasons for this affection varied but centered on reliability and survivability. Crews trusted their Greyhounds to bring them home. In the uncertain world of combat, where so much was beyond individual control, having a reliable vehicle provided psychological comfort as valuable as physical protection. The vehicle's nickname, Greyhound, contributed to this affection. Unlike official military designations which were sterile and bureaucratic, Greyhound evoked speed and grace. The name fit the vehicle perfectly, capturing its essential character in a single word. Soldiers developed personal relationships with their vehicles, naming individual M8s and taking pride in their maintenance and appearance. Crews competed informally to keep their Greyhounds in the best condition, maintaining mechanical perfection while adding personal touches that didn't compromise effectiveness. The phenomenon of veterans maintaining connections to their combat vehicles found particular expression with M8 crews. Reunion groups organised around specific units often featured restored Greyhounds. Veterans travelled significant distances to see and touch vehicles they'd operated decades earlier. At a 2003 reunion of the 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron in Colorado Springs, a restored M8 Greyhound attracted constant attention from aging veterans. Men in their 80s climbed into commander positions they'd occupied 60 years earlier, their hands automatically finding controls, their bodies remembering positions despite decades away from the vehicle. Charles Hampton, who had commanded an M8 in Europe, sat in his old position with tears streaming down his face. "This vehicle saved my life at least 10 times, he said to his grandson, who had accompanied him to the reunion. "I dreamed about it for years after the war. Sometimes nightmares, sometimes good dreams, but always this vehicle. Sitting here now, I remember everything. The smell of it, the sound of the engine, the way the controls felt. We went through hell together, and it never let me down. You can't understand what that means unless you've been there." The preservation movement for military vehicles has saved numerous M8 Greyhounds from scrapping. Organisations like the Military Vehicle Preservation Association maintain registries of surviving vehicles and provide resources for restoration and maintenance. Approximately 150 M8 Greyhounds survive worldwide, with perhaps 40 in operational condition. Restoring an M8 requires significant effort and expense. Armour plate must be repaired or replaced. Engines require rebuilding with increasingly scarce parts. Weapon systems must be demilitarized per federal regulations. Electrical systems need complete rewiring. Each restoration represents hundreds of hours of labour and tens of thousands of dollars in costs. Despite these challenges, enthusiasts continue to restore Greyhounds, driven by appreciation for the vehicle's history and significance. Each restored M8 represents not just a machine, but a connection to the men who served in them and the era they represent. The technical documentation available for M8s exceeds that of most World War II vehicles. Original technical manuals, parts lists, and maintenance procedures survive in various archives. This documentation facilitates restoration and ensures that restored vehicles remain authentic to original specifications. The Patton Museum of Leadership, formerly at Fort Knox and now at Fort Moore, maintains an extensive archive of M8-related documents. Researchers can access original blueprints, modification orders, combat reports, and training materials. This archive serves both historians studying the vehicle's impact and restorers seeking authentic information. The M8's influence on popular culture, while less prominent than tanks or aircraft, appears in various media. The vehicle featured in numerous World War II films, often in background roles during reconnaissance scenes. Historical documentaries examining armoured warfare regularly include M8s when discussing reconnaissance operations. Video games depicting World War II combat sometimes include the M8 as a playable vehicle, introducing new generations to its characteristics. These digital recreations, while simplified, capture the essential nature of Greyhound operations: fast movement, careful positioning, and quick engagements. The academic study of the M8 Greyhound continues to produce new insights. Doctoral dissertations have examined its development, production, and operational use. Scholarly articles analyse its impact on tactics and doctrine. Military historians compare it to contemporary designs, assessing strengths and weaknesses in historical context. This ongoing scholarship ensures that the M8's contributions don't fade from memory. Each new study adds to understanding of how this relatively simple vehicle achieved such significant impact. The lessons from M8 operations remain relevant to modern military forces. Current reconnaissance doctrine still emphasizes the principles the Greyhound exemplified: speed, stealth, accurate reporting, and survival through mobility. Modern vehicles incorporate these principles with advanced technology, but the fundamentals remain unchanged. Military education programs studying reconnaissance operations use historical examples from M8 units to illustrate principles and techniques. The vehicle's success provides case studies in effective reconnaissance, demonstrating how proper employment of appropriate equipment achieves strategic results. The story of the M8 Greyhound ultimately transcends the vehicle itself. It represents the triumph of practical design over theoretical perfection, the value of reliability over sophistication, and the importance of matching equipment to mission requirements. German officers who thought it was a toy learned that effectiveness matters more than appearance, that speed can defeat armor, and that the vehicle you can't catch can't be killed. Their initial contempt transformed into respect and eventually fear as Greyhounds systematically outperformed supposedly superior vehicles. The M8 didn't win the war alone, no single weapon system ever does, but it contributed significantly to Allied victory by providing commanders with the intelligence necessary for effective operations, by disrupting enemy movements, and by demonstrating that American industrial might could produce vehicles that were not just numerous but genuinely excellent at their intended purpose. Today, when restored M8 Greyhounds appear at military shows and commemorative events, they attract crowds of spectators. The distinctive six-wheeled silhouette still looks purposeful and capable. The clean lines and functional design remain aesthetically pleasing 8 decades after initial production. Veterans who served in Greyhounds, now in their late 90s or beyond, sometimes attend these events. Their presence connects past to present, linking the vehicle to the human experiences it enabled. They speak of fear and courage, of danger survived and friends lost, of youth spent in service of something larger than themselves. And they speak of the vehicle that carried them through it all, the ungainly-looking armoured car that German officers dismissed as a toy, that critics said couldn't perform, that skeptics claimed would fail. They speak of the M8 Greyhound that proved everyone wrong by simply doing its job superbly, mission after mission, for years of brutal combat, never asking for glory but earning respect through reliable excellence. The thunder of its 6 driven wheels, the crack of its 37mm gun, and the chatter of its machine guns are silent now except in memory and occasional demonstrations. But the legacy endures, preserved in museums, maintained by enthusiasts, studied by historians, and remembered by the dwindling number of men who trusted their lives to it. The German officers learned too late what that trust was based on. The M8 Greyhound was never a toy. It was a purpose-built instrument of reconnaissance warfare, designed by engineers who understood the mission, built by workers who took pride in their craft, and operated by soldiers who learned to exploit its capabilities fully. It outran German armour not through luck, but through superior design and doctrine. It survived impossible situations not through heavy protection, but through speed and smart tactics. It contributed to victory not through spectacular individual actions, but through consistent, reliable performance across thousands of missions. In the final accounting, the M8 Greyhound stands as a testament to the American way of war: practical, efficient, focused on results rather than prestige, and ultimately devastating in its cumulative effect. The vehicle dismissed as inadequate helped destroy the most powerful military machine in history, one reconnaissance mission at a time.